All right, welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of the Life Less Perfect podcast. I'm your host, Shauna G, and I'm once again excited to introduce my guest today, a local Calgary professional and colleague and dear friend, David Harder. Now, David, in the early 90s, began his professional path as an instructor at Briarcrest Bible College in Saskatchewan, in Canada, where he taught courses rooted in biblical studies and theology. During this time, David cultivated a passion for guiding others through intellectual and spiritual growth, laying a foundation of mentorship that would echo throughout his career. Coming full circle around 2017, David's trajectory took a bold turn as he entered the emerging field of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Inspired by the potential of non-ordinary states of consciousness to help heal deep-seated trauma and mental health challenges, he dedicated himself to researching and advocating for psychedelic medicine. This passion led him to found ATMA Journey Centres, a pioneering Canadian organization focused on delivering innovative psychedelic therapies. As CEO, David helped establish ATMA as a leader in the field, launching Canada's first private psychedelic therapy training programs and securing legal exemptions for psilocybin use in clinical settings. Under his leadership, ATMA grew into a hub for education, clinical trials, and immersive healing experiences, emphasizing accessibility and integrative care. In 2023, David decided to step away from ATMA for reasons we will get into the podcast. And in 2025, he's now returned to the roots of psychedelic medicine, which I'm super happy about. So David's career really reflects an unwavering dedication to exploring the human experience and empowering others to find wholeness. And as mentioned, I am honored and privileged to count him as a friend. David, say hi to our audience.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on. It's been a long time coming.
So today's episode could be considered somewhat controversial. A lot has happened, I will say, for David, as he's maybe coming to understand.
I understand that, yes.
Yes, this is the whole premise of the Life Less Perfect podcast, that life happens for us and generally steers us in a direction, and it's not always friendly. It's oftentimes bumpy. And that's certainly been the case for you, I know, David. So where shall we start? Typically, on the podcast, I like to go back a little bit, maybe into your childhood or your history, and maybe what are some of the things that led you to here?
Yeah, start at the very beginning. I mean, just very grateful, first of all, for life, for my childhood, for my family, for so many things that most people can't say. Like, I had an incredible mom and dad that would do anything for me. And still, my dad is with us today with his new bride, and getting together with them is just a joy. So I just feel completely blessed. 3 siblings, still in good relationship with all 3, and I'm very grateful for my upbringing. So anything I might say that leans towards hinting at the opposite is just not true. I have so much to be grateful for. In the context of that too, coming to realize probably in my 30s, 40s, that with the religious piece of growing up in a very tight right-wing conservative religious environment, there's an element that I've been processing, especially in the last 2 years, since the story that we're going to discuss a little bit broke. And that's just about self-worth and how things that I've done, things that I've pursued, some of the hedonic pleasures that have been descriptive of the last 10 years in my life really stemmed from a reaction to a very tight theology that said, I am nothing, that I'm worthless, that my life really is nothing without Jesus. And so we can get into the theology of that, and I don't want to offend people that I still believe in very strongly and their faith and what they stand for. But there's part of it for me that I grew up, whether it was my intake of what was being processed or the externals that were being pushed, is that I really am not worth anything. That the only way I can be redeemed is if I give myself completely, practically, even in my life, to the other. And so this last few years, laughing at what you said about happening for me, it's really forced me to see that shadow work and to see how important it is that there is value in self, that it's not pride, it's not ego driven, but that we see how wonderfully and beautifully we are created. And so to embrace that and wear it inside and to be living that day to day now, that has been a big turnaround from my childhood.
Beautiful and beautifully said, David. I couldn't agree more. I mean, like every aspect to humanity, there's a shadow side and underbelly to religion, right? And again, we mean no disregard or harm to anyone and their beliefs. This is your personal story and belief systems and what sort of come from that journey. So it's so interesting to me because it's also been part of my journey. Now, if we could do polar opposites, I would be the polar opposite of you. I was kind of a feral child and left to my own devices a lot, but also left to explore my spirituality as my own journey, right? So nothing super indoctrinated, although I did grow up in a small southern Alberta town, a big influence from the LDS church. So all of my friends at the time, I was growing up with. And it's funny because there was something in me. I remember going to church with my girlfriends, and the Mormon church was, a good solid 3 hours. And I remember I probably was about 9, and the bishop, is it called in the Mormon church? I'm not sure. Anyway, the leader, the person delivering the message, basically said that the only way that women were able to enter the kingdom of heaven was by serving the men and having many babies and all of this stuff. And I remember it just being, very tender age of 9 and thinking, well, that's just bullshit. Like it just did not sit with me. I guess I was born a rebel. But thank you for sharing that part of your story. So you go from there, and if I understand, and maybe people who don't know you, you were brought up and raised to become a leader in the church, a minister, a worship leader. Is that correct, David?
Yeah, I mean, those were choices I made,
Yeah.
pursuing that path. I went to Prairie Bible College and then to Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon, which was very interesting juxtaposition, living in the gay district in Portland and going to a very right-wing Christian theology school up the hill. But great years. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then went to teach mostly music and worship and then some theology at Briarcrest Bible College for about 7 years. Always music related. So that kind of pulled me into the Christian music industry, got to work with some Nashville stuff. I ended up moving through a long path to Calgary through Kelowna. And that's kind of in Calgary where I started to really question, a couple of years in Kelowna there too, questioning some of my belief systems. And then, of course, having 3 kids who asked a lot of questions, especially my oldest, that really made me think and go, is this real for me? Or is it just something I've adopted because I was told if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell? And so those years were very influential in shaping how I thought, what I believed in. And then, they say when the pendulum is tied very strong on one side, and when you finally release it, it tends to move hard and fast to the opposite extreme. And so that's really what happened, is that pendulum swung hard. My wife at the time, we were no longer together, but we both kind of navigated that swing together, both of us leaving the church and the faith, kind of in different speeds and shifts and bumps, but very big change of mentality and understanding of what this world was. And with that came this whole abandonment of, I would say, a rudder that kept me, that things really went wild and I pursued, often with good intentions, but even moving into the medicine work, just a sense of not having a full understanding of why I was doing what I was doing. It was more a reaction to than a drive for. And so that's something that I'm learning to look back on and say, what was the good? Like there was some really good things that I learned and I did. And there were some things that were driven from a lot of selfishness. So just trying to differentiate that, not throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, because I know there were things that happened in those years that were incredible that I look back and I can't look back and just write it all off, but also not say it was all good either and look at objectively saying, what are things I can learn from? I'm not done. But how do I drive forward with a really clear sense of purpose and understanding of who I am?
So there was no one thing or any particular catalyst that sort of started to make you wonder or think. And when you say medicine, sorry, I just want to point out to our audience in case people don't know you or know what you're talking about. We're talking about psychedelic medicine. So that's a pretty wild swing, from being sort of raised to become this leader in the church to going all the way over here to experimenting with psychedelics. So obviously that didn't happen overnight, but can you point to anything that in that direction?
You gave the warning. This may be not for children episode, but the psychedelics came after the piece about who we are as humans sexually. And that pendulum swung kind of before the psychedelic discovery. Internet came around, you start seeing that there's a whole other world out there. I had lived very chaste. Didn't have my first drink until I was probably 35. And that was kind of undercover at Briarcrest because we weren't allowed to drink. And our friends, they would have red or white coffee in their backyard. And so we kind of got introduced to that in that context of being rebels. And then opening up our perspectives on who we are as sexual beings, because I grew up very, very tight. The rules around sex were just like, no, you just don't. And so you've got, your first date at 17 years old, and I couldn't go alone with the girl. It had to be a double date. And even my parents deciding which restaurant I was allowed to go to, like very tight controls over that part of it. And I just assumed that was normal. And people that didn't live that way were, well, of course, they're going to hell. And
Heathens.
so they're heathens.
I
Yeah,
was over there being a heathen.
like huge rebel over there. So yeah, we married, we were virgins, like there was no experimenting. I wouldn't say that was even normal within our circles. Most people were quite a bit more open to stuff, but within the rules and confines of what I felt was imposed on me, I was a good boy, externally, did all the right things. And so then around 35-ish, things started to open up, and you start to see in the world that there's all these pleasures that you've missed out on when you were 17, 18 years old. There was no experimenting. There was no discovering who I was as a sexual being. And so then that pendulum swung hard, and we opened ourselves up as a couple to some really interesting and fun times, going on different events and cruises and things that really expanded our horizons. And some ways good, some ways not so good. And getting to the point where you see where some of those things really tore away at the fabric of a marriage. And it just really, really pulled it apart. And I'm not going to take all the blame for what happened between us. There was two of us. Things happened. Things were said. Things were done.
Nobody held a gun to anybody's head.
There were no guns. There was no hypnosis.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
this is right.
but there was, like I said, the pendulum had swung so far, so fast. And then even for about 4 or 5 years, living a complete double life, where I literally had two Facebook profiles, and we did this thing over here, and we were, Ken and Barbie of Christian Ministry over there, and there were kind of cognitive dissonance that came about as a result of that. Really set it up for not a good forward motion.
Yeah, and I just think sort of what's coming to me, David, is wondering how that must feel to live sort of inauthentically, not maybe feeling free to really be who you are fully. Would that be fair?
100%. And there's this side over here that's like, I'm finally living my best life.
Mhm.
Then this side over here that's like, should I be feeling guilty? Should I be confessing my sins? And so you got both of these things happening, and you're raising kids in the process of that. And I love all three of my kids. We had some incredible years together, still do. And so trying to be an example to them in the midst of this incongruence, it was just like, where's the middle ground? Like, where's that freedom and authenticity, which we swung through to the other side of that? And I feel now, finally, after the last couple of years, it's like, okay, what are those things that I can take from here and take from my background and go, who am I as an authentic, yes, sexual human being
Mhm.
that is living in integrity and authenticity? And so those things have to come together, in my opinion, in order to be healthy. Because denying that part of us is not right either. I did that for 35 years, and I knew something was wrong. Something was not authentic about who I was. And yet, moving to the other side, it just gets chaotic and gets damaging.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, maybe who aren't familiar with your story, to be fully candid, you had married essentially with no sexual experience. And then, so you'd only ever had one sexual partner, your wife. And so when you say you moved into opening that up, you were exploring your sexuality with other consenting adults, obviously. And would I be correct to say that that moved you into a bit more of a polyamorous or open marriage, or how would you describe it?
I think polyamory came a bit later in terms of even the word and understanding what we were doing.
Mhm,
It was more meeting other couples and just exploring things, and
mhm,
friendships were developed out of that, some of whom I'm still friends with today, not obviously on that level.
mhm.
But there's some great people that have discovered some of these parts of life that we discovered and met and got to know. And the polyamory came a bit later, and we'll talk about that more. But I feel like that's the area where things really fell apart, where my stance now, and Mark, if you're listening, you know who you are. He and I had a long talk about this. You could just denounce everything and come out, say, I'm against it all when this whole story broke. And it's been 2 years of really looking at that hard. Does it work? And I don't believe as humans we're capable of having a really intimate, fulfilling relationship with more than one person. I don't have judgment for people that explore and do other things on the side or whatever that is. Everybody has their own thing. But if you really want that core relationship that is knowing somebody's got your back, knowing you've got theirs, and there's nothing that's going to separate that. And yes, you're going to disagree and you're not going to see eye to eye, but those come here. They don't go to somewhere else, somebody else that's going to support you against that person. There has to be that core union. And I lived that way for 15 years with my ex-wife. And we knew we had each other's backs and there was no questioning it. So opening that up, especially when it came to double Sagittarius, I fall in love at the drop of a. And so, boom, it's like I meet somebody and there's this openness and there's agreements. I'm not doing anything quote unquote wrong because my wife might know about it or she did know about everything I did. And so then there was this, oh, yeah, this is beautiful and this is love and this is polyamory. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the whole world could just live in this free love world? And maybe in some kind of utopian space where we're not jealous and there's not this get the other person out of this guy's life. Maybe that can happen. I don't know. I don't see it in our world that we live in. I just can't see how that can be effective or serve either one of the people.
I've followed a few people in that world, Aubrey Marcus being one of them. Paul Check. Paul Check currently has two wives, so kudos to him. He's actually pulling it off now. I haven't spoken to either of his two wives, so there might be another side to that story. Who knows?
Give it a few years. Let's see what happens in a
He's
couple of
actually
years.
been quite a few years. So, kind of coming full circle into that now, because I want people to understand too, maybe what got you into the field of psychedelics, because that's an important piece in your story. And certainly that's how we met.
Yeah.
So, you can share that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't know what cocaine was from LSD, from mushrooms. Like I had zero idea. Like I said, I had my first drink, didn't know the difference between red and white wine or tequila until I was 35 years old. So I was very, very ignorant, naive, I guess you could say. And around 40 years old, I guess, somebody said, hey, why don't you come to this journey that's happening in Toronto? And I'm like, what the heck is a journey? And so she explained it a bit, not really, just said, oh, we sit around, we meditate, and we have these plants that he give us that help us really tune in to our hearts. And it's a heart opening exercise and all these buzzwords, right? But never ever saying psychedelics. And I'm looking at her going, you're talking about drugs, aren't you? No, 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 no. They're just plants that, there's selected plants that help us tune in. And there was all these vague evasions of the truth. And so finally I got the facts and it's like, okay, it's a mild psychedelic. That's what I was told. And so I agreed to go. I always up for a new adventure, especially in those years. So I went to this circle and I don't even know what he gave us. It was not a well-held circle. I mean, they broke all the rules that I've since learned to understand what is important in psychedelic therapy. Regardless, I had this incredible opening and saw my kids in a new way, saw the importance of just, tuning into myself, saw the importance of relationships and what those things could be, and some messages in the midst of that polyamorous world I was living in at the time that I'm still learning from and looking at that. Can you have it all? And the leader was like, of course you can. Just tune into it. You can have it all. I was like, not so sure about that anymore. Would, I guess, define what all is, but just running off and pursuing of anything you desire. No, there's constraints in life that help us shape who we are and help us become better people and help us serve better other people in our lives. So that led to me coming back to Calgary because I lived here, introduced it to then my wife, and she eventually, I think it was about 6 months, 8 months later, she experienced it as well. Both of us, by this point, tried a couple times. in these journeys, very intentional situations and settings. Brought it back to Calgary and said, we need to provide this for people we know because this could be so helpful to many people that we see are struggling in life, mental health, whatever it was. Tried to find somebody that would do it. Nobody would do it. Everybody I talked to is like, no, we don't do that. People in the shamanic worlds and kind of the pipe and smudge worlds, sweat lodge leaders, they knew about it. They may have done it themselves in Peru or different things, but none of them would be willing to take the risk to help lead circles. And so that drove me deep into study. Is like, okay, if nobody will do this here, how do I find the education and learnings and how I could provide these circles myself? And so a number of experiences, particularly with mushrooms at the time, that really helped shape my own thought processes and how do I bring these in service to the people? And so that led to both my wife and I giving and leading literally hundreds of people through psilocybin journeys here in Calgary and other places as well, and seeing incredible results. Not always. And a lot of learning we did was because we just didn't know what we were doing, to be honest. And there's no ATMA, there was no psychedelic times, there was no lot of bumping around in the dark and having the medicines and the people we worked with show us and show each other how these worked. So that led to the microdosing discovery. And so we started helping people microdose. That led to discovering the others in Calgary. We started meeting with other people that were, some had been in it many years, we discovered, kind of underground. And eventually, fast forward to probably 2017, 2018, I met the guy that is now the head of ATMA, and we started talking. How do we bring this to a legal basis? How do we start offering this in a way that Health Canada and the public can generally, psychologists can get behind this? And in those days, I tried to meet with psychologists. Like it was like a huge day one day when this psychologist actually agreed to meet me to discuss the possibility of psychedelic therapy tied to psychology, because it was just such a taboo topic at the time.
Yeah. Just want to stop you here for a minute, David, because I want people to really understand where you were at. So you had this experience, then you and your ex-wife started working with these medicines. And what sort of experiences did you have personally or as a couple? Was there any sort of moment where was it creating more separation from who you were brought up to be? Were you seeing a broader aspect of spirituality? Like I kind of want to know that little piece for a minute.
So ironically, timing wise, because of psychedelics, I'm still delineating some of those things, but it's when we really drifted apart. There was some infidelity involved, not on my part, that really broke down trust. And in the context of all that, even in medicine, we really worked hard at trying to figure out how to heal some of those things. And sometimes using psychedelics to help with that, especially some of the ones that are very heart opening and can really lead to honesty as a couple. And there were some really good moments that we did connect. But
Well, I want people to understand. So even though you had moved into the space where you had opened up your marriage, people need to understand that infidelity can still occur because the whole premise of having these types of relationships is having full honesty and transparency and communication. So those things can still break down even when you're having this type of relationship. Am I right?
yes, and that's a question. Not often because I don't tell the story often. But when I've talked to people about it, they're like, well, what's the problem? You were in an open marriage. Like, how do you call it cheating if she was with another guy? It's like, no, having a 3 year private relationship that I didn't even know about. And if I asked about, I would get told numerous lies. That's not the same as like polyamory, like you say, there is so much integrity in that community at its core. Not everybody that's involved in polyamory. There's a lot of liars in that community, a lot
And
of just using it for their self-gratification sexually. But the key is honesty. Like if it's not pulling you together as a couple, and if you're not being clear and honest and open about everything you're doing, that's not polyamory. That's cheating, in my opinion. And so that was a big, big piece that in the middle of raising three teenagers, I wasn't going to leave. Like, why would I leave? I can't do that to my kids. And everything in my upbringing was like, you don't leave your wife. In retrospect, would I do it differently now? Probably, but that's neither here nor there. But really understanding who I was through those years, through medicine work, it really opened my eyes to the fact that this just wasn't working. And finally, fall of, it was at 21, I guess, was when things really got clear for me that this was over. I needed to move on. And that was probably the most difficult decision of my life. And there had been short breakups before that, and my mom died in the middle of that in 2017, and lots of very, very dark nights of the soul. And that song, Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror, that was just like, shut up. It's just like, what is this here for you? Like, you can blame everybody around you. You can look at her, you can look at these other people that are doing things to you, but where's that man in the mirror? What are you learning from this? How do you grow from this?
Yeah, I love that because that's really what the medicine helps us do is take personal responsibility, right? So you're in this place that occurred, and then you're still sort of working with the medicines and really understanding how they're helping you grow and evolve personally while still seeing, shadow aspects of yourself and your ex-wife and your marriage and all of those things. And so you started to become more and more active in the psychedelic world. And so that's when I met you. I believe it was in 2018.
Yeah.
You had started a meetup group
Hmm.
in town. And so I had come back from an incredible experience in Costa Rica with ayahuasca. And, when you have an experience like that, you really need community. I mean, I'm a coach and I've worked with clients for a number of years and had lots of tools to unpack this, but you still need community, right? So that's the first thing I did when I came back home. Surprised to see, oh my gosh, there's this psychedelic meetup group in Calgary. So that's how we met. And I can say from my own experience, you leading those groups and also attending, some of your retreats and different circles and just different community gatherings, that you were, in my opinion, quite a humble leader in this community. I think I would say maybe a reluctant leader. You were wanting to share that with community and just ultimately help people is what I saw. Would that be correct?
Yes, and and
Mhm.
there's the shadow work, right? Because I truly did. Like, there was nothing more rewarding than hearing from somebody who had done a journey with us that this has literally changed my life. I feel more whatever, less addiction, or more free to look depression in the eye, or like whatever it was. There's so many stories. I could think back to just so many faces of people that we really got to love. And we were so blessed to be able to do that work.
And
And
because,
the
from
more I did
personal
it,
experience, it was a beautiful community. I mean, I loved having that. I miss it to this day. It was so lovely just to get together with like-minded people and share our experiences and just unpack that stuff and yeah, just kind of sharing our medicine. Yeah, beautiful.
yeah. And I remember I'm working on a book, in the opening scene, there's a scene where I'm standing in front of a group of therapists. It's about 300 therapists and investors in the therapy world in Scottsdale, Arizona. It happened in the fall of 21, I think. And I'm standing there, and it's just like the pinnacle of my psychedelic career, if you want to call it that, where I'm literally sharing what we've just done in Costa Rica at the retreat center that we've been able to establish as ATMA, and a dozen or so women that went through ayahuasca with a shaman from Peru, and just everything was on such a high. And the ego and feeling that you're the OG of the psychedelics in Calgary, right? And you're the man. And so, yes, and like there's both. And so, how do you, another situation, we were doing a meetup. It wasn't even about psychedelics, although most of them were related to it. And it was about communities. We happened to do a thing on what are different models of communities and how they work around the world. And somebody turns to me and says, well, David, you're the guru. You just tell us what you want to do and we'll do it. And I was just like, whoa, like it was just such a wake up call. If that's how people see me, this is going to be disaster very soon. And so, yes, and again, two things can be true at once. I truly love the work for the work's sake and what it did for people. And I honestly had a heart to help people. And like you say, a bit reluctant because I didn't want to be seen as like a pastor or something that I'd left from the churches. But the changes that it made were what we were trying to do in the church, like truly helping people heal their inner child and those inner traumas that had been so prevalent in their lives, seeing those break open and people starting to flourish. Yes, it was incredible. And again, looking back, like the article that was written about me by this guy from Britain, he took all those things and painted them with the brush of sinner. And I just won't take it. I just won't. Yes, there's things I had to change. But to say that all of that was just because I was trying to get in women's pants, no, that was not what I was about. And we had strict rules when it came to psychedelics and our open relationships. When we did retreats, those were not mixed. When we did journeys for people, we had hard lines. There was always two of us present. Like all the things that kind of got put out there. And, juicy stories tend to grow quickly. But that's what it painted it as. And that's not how we operated. It was a beautiful thing that was happening.
So I want to just interrupt you there for a minute because I want to just circle back a little bit for people who don't know you and don't know what the story is about. So you went from leading these meetup groups and working in the psychedelic community, obviously in the underground a little bit there, and serving people and helping people for all intents and purposes under the guise of harm reduction. People can access these medicines, obviously, everywhere, but providing safe spaces and support and all of that. So you went from there to then sort of really wanting to bring this thing full circle and above ground and legal and like, let's get this thing happening in Canada. And so is that what sort of led you to that full circle moment when you were talking to these therapists? I mean, there's a backstory there. I'm sure it started before that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece was Catalyst. The hardest thing that I had letting go was Catalyst, which was a psychedelic conference. It was quickly becoming the biggest thing in Canada in that space. There's a couple others, Plant Spirit Medicine. There was one in Victoria, a few other gatherings that happened, but weren't consistent annual events. Michael Pollan, Rick Doblin, like all the names, Tony Bosses, Janice Phelps. Like we had all these people as speakers through the 3 years that we ran it. And that was really a powerful thing that was happening
Mhm.
and heady. It was very it was my element. It was what I loved to do, first of all, because planning events and putting these things on, and then combining that with something that I believed in so much with psychedelics, that really led to the platform to speak about these things. So emceeing those was, we had to do two online versions because of COVID, of course. But then 2022, we were able to bring it live to Kingston, Ontario. And some of the things that came out of that were absolutely brilliant. Companies connecting with other companies, making deals, and therapists connecting with training programs, and like just go down the list of what took place there. And it was just starting to see its potential. And so we had that plan for 23. And then just before that is when I was speaking at that event in Scottsdale.
Cool. So just so people can understand, well, all of this is happening, which is just, all of your dreams and visions sort of coming true, literally. You were still involved in your marriage with your ex-wife, and she was in a relationship at that time, if I understand correctly, that was kind of a long-term situation. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, we were good friends, and
Yeah,
they're together
everybody was
today.
good
Uh,
friends. And you had become involved with a woman in the community. And maybe, well, I'll let you tell the story from there because this is really why we're here today, because we want to address
oh boy.
what happened and what's been said. And for people who don't know, there was a podcast that came out where this woman told a story and she disguised her voice and she wasn't showing her face, but she certainly named you and she named your ex-wife and she named your children and she named your, I mean, she just made some really horrendous accusations that we can discuss, that which by the way, just for everybody to know, he's been fully cleared of these accusations. But I just want to circle back to that time period and what was going on in that situation so people can understand.
Yeah, woman in the community that was part of this group, and there was overlap with the psychedelics things that we did in terms of gatherings that we would host, potlucks, etc. Um, got involved kind of at a very surfacey level, but too deep, and to where she became very obsessed and decided that, and she saw the cracks in my marriage, and she was going to be the replacement for my wife. And she told me so in no uncertain terms, mostly in jokes. And hey, when this happens, and you and I will be the king and queen of psychedelics, these kinds of things would come out of her mouth. And I got more and more nervous about where this was going and tried to manage it, stepping back out the door and realizing she was really, really obsessed. And so I was trying to be very careful to the point that I would literally manage my inbox with texts and trying to keep so she wouldn't get angry, but that she didn't feel like I was moving closer and just trying to slowly, and it just obviously, you can't do that. You just can't. You have to head these things straight off. And I didn't. And I tried to manage it. She got louder and louder when she realized that I was not moving closer and that I wouldn't engage with her. And then started making threats, mostly indirectly to my friends and saying, I'm going to destroy him. And I know how. And
Yeah.
then,
I would just like to point out, I was very new to the community at the time. I mean, I knew you, like I said, through the meetup groups, but just from what I managed to see, it looked quite friendly. Everybody seemed happy and engaging and open. And certainly, even in private conversations, she related to me what a wonderful man you were and how any woman would be quite lucky to be with you. And she counted herself as that person. So I just want to put that little bit of a disclaimer out there from what I gathered and what I saw. She was always at the events. Now, I will say one thing in observation, and this is not judgment, but observation that she was, and because I do my own work now with clients with psychedelics, and I see this in the community, as I'm sure you can speak to too, is people coming to the medicine a lot, like doing medicine, more medicine, really not ever integrating one experience before they're now at the next journey session or retreat space or whatever. She seemed to really have a difficult time sort of integrating those experiences. And like you said, as time grew, I kind of came to see her become more and more mentally unwell. Like she just seemed very nervous. At one point, she lost a whole bunch of weight, which you typically see in clients whose central nervous systems are completely ramped up and a lot of HPA axis dysregulation. So that's what I sort of noticed just as an observer. And so obviously this was kind of going on in the background, which many people might not have understood. Would that be a fair statement?
yeah, yeah, very. And it was particularly at a very specific event, New Year's Eve. I'll never forget it, where I had started to engage with this other woman that I was with right through the divorce after that. And my wife was fully aware of it. And when this woman saw me with this other woman, and not my wife was fine because she knew there was cracks there, but when she realized that I fully had moved on, that I was not coming back to her, that's when everything really hit the fan. And including her own, what I observed was her own health, mental health, and
Yeah.
everything. And she declared, I'm going after this guy. I'm going to destroy him. And she knew about the psychedelic work we did, which, she could make stories about that and about our relationship. And that's when the podcast came out 2 months later. And then 3 months after that, the cops showed up at my door.
Yeah, and what a day that must have been for you. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or
Yeah, I mean, I look back and think I have really lived. Like I have lived a life that has so many ups and downs. And I don't think without those downs that are like you look through the horizon and they just stand out. And that one is one I will never forget.
you know what?
Where literally,
I don't want to interrupt your flow here, but I want to stop because I want to talk a little bit about what happened before that day. So, you mentioned that people had started to talk in the community and there were warning signs. And so the podcast comes out. And now at this point, you have started ATMA Journey Centres. The company was starting to move to a place where it was starting to become successful, starting to become profitable. And meanwhile, this is all sort of collapsing in the background. And so when the podcast came out, David, you want to just tell us what happened then for you in terms of your life and your career and what happened as a result of that?
yeah, I was literally down in Belize. I had done a trip with this other woman that I was then with. And we were at a Yopo ceremony retreat center, really well held, incredible shaman guy, and a friend of ours that was there that had kind of brought us to that place, an indigenous lady from Canada, well known in the psychedelic community. And I get this text from a friend that says, really sorry what she's trying to do to you and your family. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so then he starts explaining this podcast had just been released and it's starting to make its rounds. So I tried to listen to it. I still haven't listened through the whole thing. I have no desire to hear because I could hear the lies that were starting in the first half. It's just like, this is going nowhere good and I don't need my psychology repairs to have to deal with the rest of it. And so that was just a huge, and I knew this was going to be big because anything juicy like this, especially in the community that I was working in, that this was not going to be nothing. that this was going to be I didn't realize how big it would get, but it hit me really hard. And had a chat with this Indigenous lady, and she's like, "Well, you just did tell me last night how tired you were of dealing with Health Canada and all these regulatory things, and this wasn't anything to do with the psychedelic work that you signed up for." And she said, "Next time you want to manifest something, maybe slide in those words ease and grace with it." I was like, touche. And those words would haunt me for 2 years. But yeah, so I came home after that, and that's when the proverbial shit hit the fan. And Catalyst was set to run 6 weeks later. And first Gabor, then Paul Stamets, then like dominoes, the speakers just canceled, just not wanting to be associated with any controversy. Some of them took sides, some of them didn't. Some of them were really gracious. Rick Doblin said, I listened to it. I can see what she's doing. I don't believe what she did. So people like that were really supportive. Others that were incredibly surprising to me. People I thought were really close friends that I still have not heard from to this day. And they immediately jumped, took sides, went to ATMA, said, you got to get rid of this guy. He's bad. And even to the point that he should not be allowed to own shares in the company. It got really ugly. It was at the point almost every day I'd wake up and just dread the day because I didn't know what would be dropping that day. And for like about 6 weeks. And that culminated May 7th. We had our house, on the lake in Bonavista where we held a bunch of gatherings, as you know. Beautiful place. And we had things booked out for 6, 8 weeks of all kinds of workshops, women's stuff that this lady ran. And there was a lady that ran breathwork sessions there, very well-known breathwork facilitator. Therasil was running an event there, our competition. And we were hosting Therasil to do a training event there. And one by one, all of them just canceled because they said, we don't believe in what you're doing. And we're backing away. And without any discernment, any talking to me, most of them just, I got this angry letter saying, I can't believe you've been doing this all these years, living a double life. And it was over. And so it's like, okay, I can't afford this house. I have no job. I had to back away from my job at ATMA. And then we had the house stuff all up for sale at a big yard sale, which ran for 2 weekends. And I was completely in shock. And then there's a knock at the door. And the girlfriend that I was with, she went to the door, opens the door, and there's a cop standing there. And she just thinks he's, what are you doing with all these cars or something? She never even crossed her mind. And as soon as I saw him, I knew this woman that was accusing me had gone to the cops. So made the trip down to the jail, spent a few hours in jail, dealing with the forms, dealing with all the stuff. The cop telling me, he said, this is going to be the best thing for you because you can finally put this to rest. Because I can see in her report she's not telling the truth and see that she has an agenda. But that was not a lot of consolation. So right after that, it's like, okay, what do you do? How do you deal with this legally? So hiring lawyers to defend yourself, or what's the process? Is this over in 6 weeks? Is this years? Like, no idea. The only time I've been in court was to fight a traffic ticket that had my name spelled wrong. So it's like this was whole new territory for me.
Mm.
And then the shadow work started. I don't know how else to say it. I ran, took off, jumped on a plane, went to Colombia, spent 6 weeks there. My son, he's like, I'm coming to join you. The family was incredibly supportive. My dad, my 3 kids. Most of the friends, if I didn't know for sure because they were quiet, I assumed they had taken the other side. Now finding out some hadn't, but many that just, oh, we can't associate with you because we might lose clients, therapists, many just getting really triggered from their own shit in their past and chose to take it as white man bad, let's gang up on them and make things worse for them. And I'm learning to realize that many of those just had not dealt with their own trauma from their childhood or things that had happened to them legitimately, that they saw another man doing this to another woman and without even asking questions, just immediately jumped to, he's a bad person. And I get it. I can see it psychologically, but sure didn't make it easy on my end.
No. And I want to just back it up a little bit because, the accusations were very serious. And so I want you to speak into those accusations because she essentially accused you of non-consensual violations to her physical body, which I want you to have the opportunity now to speak into what she said happened and from your perspective and side, because I was really surprised at the community and sort of how they responded and the lack of discernment, because my belief system has always been, you know what, there are two sides to every story and somewhere in the middle lies the truth. But what really bothered me, and not just because I was your friend and am your friend, but just as a human being, was just this very one-sided. Like I said, this story comes out. She's not showing her face. She's not sharing her name, very clandestine, and just spews this story. And there's no literal chance or opportunity for you to be heard. And so my point of having you on the podcast was to let you have this opportunity. So if you could speak into, from your position, what was happening, and then we can even get into where you take responsibility for the situation and so on. But let's start there.
Yeah, it's a little triggering, I'll be honest, because I've gotten to the place where I just don't defend myself anymore, because as soon as I do, people say, see, you're guilty, you're angry. And it's just like, you can't speak up. Just the other day, I was in a group of men going through similar things from across Canada. It's a meetup that happens once every other week.
Mm.
And hearing that from other guys, it is like, I can't even tell my story because people just yell at me. Because right away, if you tell your story, see, you're guilty, you're defending yourself. And so I hesitate even going there, because people listening to this, and I know there's going to be people that already made their judgment up, and there's nothing I can say, and that's fine. And what I've come to conclude is that I don't have to wear that, because I know what happened. I
Exactly.
know what happened behind. There's only two people that know what happened. And I also believe that this woman, in her psychological state, has created this story, has told it so many times. I do believe she believes it herself. I
Yeah.
really do. And that can happen. But the accusations that I took from her, I did not ask. That I, like, even the descriptions in graphic detail about what I did that night,
Mm.
it's just so far-fetched. It's not something I would do. How she described it in the police report, and I wasn't even allowed to keep it. I had to read it in my lawyer's office. And I'm going through it, and I'm just shaking my head in just disbelief that how can you take what was, which is true. We had a relationship for a while, but not ever. Like, I constantly would, like, I just want to be careful what I say.
Yeah.
But there was never a time that I didn't feel like she wanted more than what I was willing to give her.
Mm.
That she was always begging to get together again. And she was always saying, can we do this? And can we do that? I would like you to do this on me, and some graphic sexual stuff. And I'm just like, no, that's not, I'm not into that.
Mhm.
And like, she wanted more all the time, until all of a sudden she saw that we were done after not even being together for almost 2 years, and that there was no chance she could have me back. Then she took those stories, turned them on their head, and created this podcast and the police report. The biggest redemption for me was hearing from my lawyers April 26th, 2024, sitting in my car in front of a lake down in Nelson area, because I was on my way to a workshop, and lawyers saying they've dropped the charges, and the Crown told me there's 0% chance this is going to get a guilty verdict. And you can conjecture, those were the exact quotes. There's 0% chance this goes to a judgment on you. And why? Because even just reading it for him, and I don't know if he met with her, I don't know what the full story was, but he saw how full of lies it was. And even more than that, how the agenda that she had to destroy me was the reason she reported it. It wasn't for herself. It wasn't to save other women like she claimed. It was to get back at me.
Yeah, so I just want to circle back a little bit too, because I know when there were first rumblings and when this thing started picking up steam, obviously you were hearing from different members of the community that her story was changing and she was saying some pretty wild things. Was there not an opportunity where you reached out to try to mend things? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there was a mutual friend. She had actually seen her as a therapist. I knew her very well. She ran events at my house, breathwork facilitator, that I asked, would you be willing to facilitate some kind of mediation?
Mhm.
And she says, well, I won't be an official mediator, but I'll sit with you both and try to work through it.
Mm.
So this woman tried to bring two others, only one would come. And so he shows up and he's just fingers in my face and my chest. You bad man, you need to pay her money. You need to do this. You need to do that. And we tried to mediate. I tried to apologize for things I had done. basically apologizing for leading her to believe that there was a chance of us having a relationship, which I take full responsibility for. I should never have led her along in any way, in any kind of relationship, let alone sexually, like that, full stop. Massive mistake. And anybody that looks at my life even then was going, David, what are you doing? But by the time I got out, it was too late. So that led to the end of it. She just sat there, looked at me and said, I'm taking you down and I know how to do it. And there's no apologies now. It's too late.
So she foretold you then in that meeting what she was planning to do. Now it's unfortunate because this therapist didn't ultimately stand up for you and speak into that, which I think your ex-wife was also very aware of what was happening in the situation. Would that be fair?
Yeah, in fact, the last meeting we had, it was a New Year's Eve party, and I hadn't seen this woman, this accuser, for almost a year. And she texted that night or that day and said, my party got canceled. Is there any way you can invite me? I'd love to be there. And it was just a small group of close friends. And we're like, oh, what do we do? And I should have just said flat out, no, it was dumb. But we said, well, there's other people that would love to come that are just sitting at home tonight. Let's just open up the party and make it bigger. So we did. And that's when she saw me with this other girl. And my wife said after that night, after everybody left, because this accuser, she was drunk. I think I heard rumors she was high on mushrooms and completely unhinged, just running around, literally trying to follow me around everywhere I went. My son comes home and he finally left because he was so disgusted by what this woman was doing, even trying to hit on him. And it was just messy. And it just sounds like this was a messy party. It wasn't. It was a beautiful gathering of beautiful people, like strong, independent people.
One person was messy.
One person was messy, exactly.
Mhm.
And so my wife says, David, never again. No matter what she says, no matter what the situation, she is not allowed in this house ever again. And I'm like, 100%. I agree with you. It was a mistake. We should never have opened the door. But 2 months later is when the podcast hit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that was really the nail in the coffin for her mental health, from what I can gather, because she was now not only didn't have access to you, but didn't have access to the community anymore, which I think was really very, in fairness, probably very hurtful for her. And we can all understand that perspective, obviously. Wow. So that all goes down. So now you're charged. We've gone through all this time period. So you spent some time. I'd like to get into a little bit of the shadow work because this is a big part of what this podcast is about, is how these difficulties. Now, this was a whopper. This is a big time adversity situation that happened for you. And I know you're still coming to terms with that, but ultimately you're spending some time in South America and Mexico, and you're really digging into who you are, why this is happening, and what is there for you to learn in all of this. Now, you spoke a little bit about people questioning what you were even sort of doing, messing around with this woman in the first place. And I think that's a piece maybe we can speak into. Maybe you can talk to as a man that was a bit of a typecast for you at that time and what was going on there.
Yeah. Circle right back to the beginning conversation about lack of self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
I really did not believe that I was worthy of the life I was living. And I made choices subconsciously that brought me down to size. And listening to Esther Hicks and Joe Dispenza and all these things about you create your own realities and how you think and how you feel is how you will experience life. It's like, shut up. It's like, no, this happened to me. These things are not just something I called in, but then I look at it and go, no, there was a piece of that that said, I'm just not worthy. I'm not worthy of really healthy relationships that are life-giving and mutually beneficial. They're just like, I have to give in order to prove my worth. So I'd look for projects within that poly world of finding people that really needed saving and that I could help save. And this woman fit that to a T. It's like she needed help and she needed support. And I gave her that and it gave her worth. And it was so driven out of the wrong motives. It's
Yeah.
not, here I am and people need help. They come to you, you provide help, they give you help. There's a healthy co-regulation of giving and receiving, as opposed to I'm the savior, I'm going to save you, and I'm going to come in like this man on a white horse and look at all the gifts I can bring you with the psychedelic work and with all this knowledge and my spiritual background. Damn it, I'm going to fix you. And that's what drove me, I believe, looking back now, to not just her, but other relationships as well, that were just not healthy in any way. Because how do you have a healthy relationship when one feels like they're the savior and the other feels like, who knows what they feel like? I mean, that's on their side, but it's just like not a healthy environment.
Yeah, when you look at that, and we'll get into the attachment style perspective a little bit, but certainly what I've learned, now in my 50 plus years of relationships, it's such a different thing to enter in relationship as healthy and whole. And having done this work, versus sort of who we attract. I've said this before in the podcast many times, we're just all little antennas running around. And sometimes we attract who we are so that we get a reflection back, things that we're maybe not enjoying about this person that we also need to work on, but also reflections oftentimes of, again, the work that we need to do. So seeing that savior complex, shall we say, that you had, which again can probably go full circle back to your childhood, right? Like, I'm not worthy and I'm broken and I'm just essentially a sinner. So now that's being reflected back to you. And you were also trained and taught that your work here is to help rescue these people in a way. Is that fair? Am I missing the mark?
No, 100%. It's just, yeah, dealing with the realities of motivations as opposed to the outward manifestations of what I was doing.
Hmm.
And that became the shadow work in Mexico and onward. Had a therapist, IFS, internal family systems, that I worked through. I was seeing her before this happened, trying to work through at the point of divorcing my ex-wife. And that whole time, so there's all these other things that I was also dealing with. 32 years together, 3 kids, amazing relationship that just had expired. And so processing that with this lady, and while I was seeing her, this whole thing came down. And so that was a real lifeline in helping her dive down, going back. What are the things that caused this to happen? Why do you call this? Why is this in your life? And so that kind of set the stage for that next, well, the year of waiting for the courts to decide what to do with me was probably the most. I've never been prone to depression, suicide ideation. That's never been part of my life. And after those charges were put on me, and for a year before the Crown looked at it, yeah, I can understand the darkness. And so even getting to anger is a positive emotional shift. But there were many, many dark, dark days that I just would pray that the night would end and I would go with it because I just didn't want to face another day. So much more about this woman, the accusations, she did what she, that wasn't even what bothered me. It was how the whole industry, almost as a whole, wrote me off without any conversation, without any opportunity. And there were a few that reached out. I can think of a few names right now, yourself included, some that didn't even know me, that said, I see through this. This is not right. You need an opportunity to be heard as well. They weren't like, you're right, she's wrong. It's just like, no, this feels really icky. But just that overwhelming sense. And it was bigger in my head even than it was in reality, because it is a small pond. It's not like the whole world heard about it. Like,
Mhm.
it didn't make the New York Times. But within the community I lived in, everything shifted. And there were very, very few people that didn't just side with it. And so that darkness of like coming from, we didn't talk about the whole Tantra piece in the middle of our opening our marriage, and learning about Tantra and how important it is for consent and all these things that became so part of who I was. And having that thrown at me, like the most awful thing I could be accused of. I think it would have been easier if I'd have been accused of murder.
Yeah.
But having that piece accused, it just was, it shot me into very, very dark places.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that because having known you and witnessed this sort of rise to your success and it happening ultimately too at the point where this was really becoming successful, the timing was quite interesting there. But to have that happen and then just to lose everything, your business and your life's work, and going through divorce and the collapse of 30 years of marriage and all of these things, and the loss of your reputation, in particular. It was really something. I just want to acknowledge how I witnessed that being tremendously difficult. And I can't even imagine going through that. So I want to commend you for your work and your effort and being able to ride that through. Thank God for our children, hey, because a lot of these things without our children and that divine purpose of parenting, many of us might not stick this ride out.
No, I'd have got off the ride Yeah, there was a few moments in Colombia, Mexico too, where it's like, this is not worth it. It's been a good run. I've got a lot of good memories. Let's just check out here. Let's
Mhm.
take the off ramp. But, there's a story in the Bible. Ironically, I go back to that Joseph, where he was, the long story of him being picked up by his brothers, brought into Egypt, sold as a slave, then being accused of raping the Pharaoh's wife, getting thrown in jail, him interpreting dreams over a period of years, getting called up, becoming the right hand man to the Pharaoh, and then his brothers coming back, and now them bowing down in front of Joseph, and the whole story of how Joseph then saved the world, basically the known world. And I'm not making parallels that I'm Joseph, I'm going to save the world. I hope I can get back to saving, some small things for some people and mostly for myself. But the verse is that you intended to harm me, but God intended for good.
Beautiful. Well, what a perfect segue. So, this podcast is also about not only the difficulties that we can transmute, but what is our medicine that we can share coming out of this. What are you working on now, David? And what are you sharing? I know you mentioned you were in a men's group, but what is your vision moving forward and what would you like to offer coming out of this experience if you can?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. Some things are just like objectively, the way that company I started has treated this whole thing is absolutely despicable. I gotta say, it felt like they were in my corner for the first 4 or 5 months, and then things just really went downhill. And it felt like they saw an opportunity to keep me out, never come back, as long as they sided with some of the accusations. And I can't say exactly what happened behind the scenes, but what it felt like on the outside was just basically a boot to the ass saying, get out of here. We don't ever want to see your face again. And so I've had to take this to court. I've had to pursue it in the court of law because there's things they're doing that are completely illegal. And to be honest, I just don't believe they're operating in integrity anymore. It's not the company that I've founded. It's not the vision I had with the co-founder. They're off on tangents that have nothing to do with what I see as really making a difference in people's lives. And that's not to say everybody that works at ATMA is bad. There's some good people there, but
Mhm.
the direction from the top has lost its way. And I want to say that publicly, unashamedly, that what I started, what I had a vision for, and what my co-founder helped finance and get off the ground, that's not what's there anymore. It's really sad to me. That was very difficult to see that go awry. And whether they're successful financially, to me, it doesn't matter. It's just like it was never about the money, and it's easy to get carried away when there's millions of dollars on the table on paper. But that has been very difficult. But in spite of that, big temptation in the middle of all this to say, I'm just done. I'm out of this world of psychedelic therapy. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And beautiful experiences in Mexico under a tree doing this beautiful medicine called 5-MeO, DMT or Bufo alvarius, with a gentleman from Mexico City and a woman from Amatlan. Thanks, Richard, for that connection. Just incredible time I had there, living there for 4 months, getting to know these Mexican people. And she led me through a Cambo session in preparation for this 5-MeO session. And what came out of that, and there's all these things. Is it our minds? Is it the spirit? Is it our internal guidance system? But the clear message came out of that: get back home. You need to be home. You need to go reclaim your space. You need to speak up. You need to not let these lies determine who you are in the future. And I know there's people that will never cross my path again because they've written me off. That's totally fine. But I need to come back here and find my way back with the medicine and finding ways to help bring it forward in a good way again. Because I believe the psychedelic industry, by and large, has lost its way. It's completely lost its focus and direction in helping people. And again, I say that knowing there's good people in the midst of that industry. But so much of it, I saw it over and over and over, was done for the pursuit of becoming millionaires. They just saw it as another gravy train. And so I'm back. I want to do this in a good way. It's not about money. Of course, we all have to get paid. Of course, we have to figure these things out in order to pay the bills. But what that looks like, that's the exciting part. That's the adventure. Poking around at a few different options right now. And I feel very optimistic about where this goes. The world is in a very big transition, and I see it as opportunity. I see it as a very optimistic time in the history of this planet to be here. Like we chose to be here at this time. And I don't believe that if this hadn't happened to me, this whole thing that was so awful, and I don't recommend this on anyone, don't call this in, choose a better path. But it wouldn't have prepared me for what I believe is in the future. And I don't even know what that is, but I'm excited to find out and discover what it is.
Well, it certainly has created resiliency and strength that I can see in you, my friend. And so, again, I just want to honor that journey because I know how difficult it was for you. So, moving forward, I just want to speak into a little bit at the time to the cancel culture that was in the midst of all of this and how we're maybe moving through that and into a new era where we can actually listen with both ears to both sides before we just absolutely reject someone and judge them and decide that they're guilty without ever hearing their side to the story. If this ever happens to someone, like maybe if there's one person that this could help, if this happens to somebody, what would you advise them to do?
Wow. Like I mentioned, I think I mentioned in passing the men's group that I was in just last week. And what I saw, there was 13 of us in the room, in the Zoom room, and 12 of them, 11 of them. There's one other guy that I could see was really in a healthy space, and his story made mine look like a walk in the park. But you could tell he'd been doing his work. And what I mean by that is, how do you go in? How do you find who you truly are? How do you reject the lies, but accept the truth? And sometimes those truths are pretty dark. But how do you alchemize those into being a true person aligned with your true self and not be operating out of ego? And that is a long and arduous journey when this kind of thing happens. So, I mean, obvious things. I have had a morning practice that started before this happened with meditation. I look forward to the morning when I can get up and meditate now. It's so incredible. And it's ironic because growing up, devotions, like everybody should be having devotions. And if you were really spiritual, you'd have them in the morning and the evening before you went to bed. So there was this pressure, and it was always done out of kind of a sense of guilt, a check mark thing that you had to do. And it's funny for me now because waking up, I can't wait to do my devotions. It's just connecting with spirit, connecting with self, connecting with that value of who this creation is, um, and really getting centered for the day. Sometimes it sticks for about an hour and you get ego running the show again. Other times it helps carry you through the day. Support is so key, like finding friends, family that do believe you, like because it's so quick. It's a story, and stories happen and stories move on, especially in our media culture where
Yeah.
the news cycle is so quick.
This could
And
literally happen to anyone,
oh,
honestly.
nobody's immune to this.
No, no.
All it takes is one person to not like you, raise their voice and say, he did this.
Mhm.
And typically, and it's happened to women too, but almost 95%, I would say, is men.
Yeah.
And the stats that only 2 or 3% are false accusations, that's completely false. The actual stats, when you dig into what's going on in society, it's about 50 to 60% of accusations are false accusations, often by somebody who knows you really well, often related to custody, because if you can bad white man, the wife gets the kids. And that to me is one half of the problem. The other half of the problem is I've known women that have talked to me and said, this man did this to me. And I'm like, why would you not go forward and report this? Well, I would never want to look like your accuser. It's like, holy crap. So there's this, it's a cycle where both sides, there's no coming together and healthy masculine, feminine relating and respecting each other. And when these things happen, have a sense of, okay, let's listen to both sides. Let's try to find resolution. No, it's right away, bad man. And so he gets ostracized, he gets destroyed, or courts go, don't believe the woman. And they throw the cases out. And some have said that to me. Yeah, we still don't believe you. We still think you're lying. And I get that. And some people listening to this right now, they're not going to believe me. And I've come to terms with that and said, I can't convince them. I'm not going to try. I don't care if that's your path and that's what you think about me, because that's not on me. I know the truth. I can live in my truth. And if there's people who refuse to have anything to do with me, sometimes it's difficult because those were good people that I really respected, but I have to accept that and allow it to be their thing that they deal with. But finding people that are true, finding people you can talk to that have your back, that can support you through this, because it going alone is very difficult. And these men, these 12 guys that I talked to, Some of them were just all alone and just seeing the pain that they were going through, especially the couple that it was about custody and they've got a 2-year-old that they're now not allowed to see because they're going through this conviction and nothing's been proven. It's all in the court still. Nothing's been proven one way or the other. And yet, right away, the court system sides with the woman and says you can't see the kids because the accusations, if they're true, are pretty heinous. And sometimes those are true. And
And
so we
we
have to
see why it has to be that way, right? In
yeah,
certain situations. But in my mind, it's a reflection, the microcosm of the macrocosm, right? It's like in society at large, we have this women against men thing, the toxic patriarchy, all of this stuff, which in fairness is happening for a reason also, right? The feminine has been suppressed for a very long time. And we have this universal law, as you mentioned, of the pendulum swinging one way and then wildly swinging the other way. And hopefully at some point, I think maybe now is the time we're going to settle. I don't know. Because there's an aspect too. I have 2 daughters. I teach them about personal responsibility, like where do we as women take personal responsibility for possibly putting ourselves in situations that we shouldn't have. And I didn't speak up or I didn't use my voice or I didn't, you know what I mean? There's just so many moving pieces to all of that. But like you said, I really want this podcast to be a space where we can just come and hear each other, right? So maybe our viewpoints are way different, but where can we meet in the middle and talk about what makes us more alike rather than what separates us, right? So I love that you were brave enough to come and speak into this today, David, because I know it hasn't been easy.
it's an understatement. Yeah, I knew even in the darkest nights that there would come a day that I would look back and say, I'm grateful for the fact that this happened.
Yeah.
And I'm getting to that point
Mhm.
where every day is a practice of self-love, of respecting myself, of not just running into other relationships that don't mean anything. Finally put myself out there, you know, in the dating world. And it's so different myself than what I would have done before. It's not about numbers and experiences. It's about finding one person that I can truly be myself with, show up for, and somebody that helps me grow, somebody I can help grow. And the spiritual path we're on, whether we like it or admit it or not, we need people in our lives. Shadow work is an interesting term because that by definition means you don't see it. You don't see what those things are. Well, this experience helped me see it, helped me see the things that I had to work on. But also in relationship, that's where you see things. And the woman I was with after this happened, my God, she knew how to point things out. It was hard, but it showed me things about myself that really showed that shadow that needed work.
Mhm.
Um, so where it goes, I'm prepared now. If I'm single the rest of my life, I'm happy. I
Yeah.
truly am. I can honestly say that. It doesn't scare me. 2
Mhm.
years ago, that would have scared the shit out of me. The idea of being alone. And it's like, I'm not alone. I have myself. So from that point, that's not my goal. I want to be in relationship,
Mhm.
but it doesn't scare me if it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Right there with you, brother. It's that whole thing, like I've said before, once you're in alignment with who you truly are, that higher self, the soul self aspect, if you want to call it, no one or nothing can ever separate that from you again, right? And so it's finding that wholeness in another person. So there you are, you're doing the work. This is hopefully what you will attract now in your
Yeah,
life.
there's a meditation I do quite often. It's I love you, I am listening. And it's basically that idea, one person saying this, the other saying, I am listening internally. It's like that true self saying, I love you. And our ego self saying, I'm listening. And so finding that balance of that dichotomy of understanding that we're not just one thing. We are the observer and we are the ego. And these things are not bad. We need the ego. It's like a horse. We need to ride it. But when the horse starts riding us, which I did allow for some years, then things get pretty weird and uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah. And again, when we start butting up against that, that's just higher self saying, yo, you're offside, you're out of line here, come back, And sometimes those bricks upside the head are a little tougher than some of the more subtle whispers, shall we say.
Yes. And I've incorporated with ease and grace into my prayers now.
Nice. Yeah. You and me both. I'm just like, let's just learn through joy. How about now? Yeah. This is one good thing about being in our 50s, right? Having some wisdom, perhaps, or knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the other story from the Bible that I listened to on my motorbike. I drove down to Mexico on my bike, which was absolutely therapy. That's another advice for anybody going through this or anything else that's been really dark in your life. Get a motorbike. There's actually scientific studies that it helps process things in your life. But listen to Job on Audible, the book of Job in the Bible. And if you understand the book, he lost everything. Devil came to God, said, "Hey, we see Job as this beautiful, righteous man, but if we took these things away, he would curse you." And so this whole story of how the breaking down of Job's life. And at the end, again, after all of this, and he deals with his friends giving him advice and very bad advice. And his response, God comes to him and basically points out some shadow work he had to do. And his response is, "The Lord gave and took away. May his name be praised." And so it's like, how to get to that point where, okay, I had all these things. It was beautiful. And I'm grateful for that day that I stood in front of that group in Scottsdale delivering this beautiful thing. And it all disappeared. And regardless, God, the universe, whatever your belief system is, it's got your back. And he did it for a reason. So learning to embrace that, I've learned in whatever state I am to be content. That's not easy, but so important.
So important. And I happen to believe that we chose this before we came in, to have these experiences to help us evolve and grow and then turn around and share it with our brothers and sisters as
I'd
medicine.
like to talk to that previous self that chose this because I would probably have some advice for him.
And by the time you get to see that self and interact with that part of you, of course, you'll have that full understanding and awareness anyway. So.
Yeah.
Well, my brother, I would love to talk to you for much longer, and I'm sure we could talk about many more things. But for now, I love having you share your experience and just have an opportunity to be heard and seen in this because I know it's been a long time coming. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I have to say, I look forward to the future.
Good.
I don't know what it is, and it's incredible.
Yes.
Very optimistic.
Good. And on that note, thanks for joining us.